So my first Mothering Sunday was not exactly a picture of domestic peace or rosy motherhood. Isabel was about 6 months old, and she'd started teething. And she spent most of the night howling miserably. And by the morning, all of us were worn out and fed up. Has anyone else ever been there? Heidi, surely not. Of course not, no. However, I was determined I was going to go to church because, hey, it was Mother's Day and it was traditional and I wanted those daffodils. But inevitably, perhaps, James and I spent most of the service struggling, trying to keep a really grizzly Isabel quiet. And we felt really embarrassed and really awkward because we were new to the church and there were no other babies there. And it seemed really formal. It wasn't ideal for a crying baby. But can I just add that getting to church with kids of any age takes a huge commitment. So hats off to all of us who try it and have to navigate that. And please feel you're always welcome here. And we don't have a shush policy. And if anyone tells you that, do let us know. Anyway, back to that Mothering Sunday. It was a retired priest who was taking the service that day. And he had the most sonorous voice. He sounded a bit like the bishop in The Princess Bride. Have you ever seen that film? But he didn't have the speech impediment. And he had a lot more gravitas. He was quite a formidable guy, if I'm honest. Anyway, he started his sermon with these words. When I hear the story of Moses' mother placing her baby in a basket in the waters of the Nile, I wonder how many desperate parents have felt a similar urge to leave their screaming infant in a river after a sleepless night. It took a moment for what he'd said to land, and there were a few shocked gasps. He was quite deadpan, but it made us chuckle, and we felt a lot better. And just in case you're concerned, Isabel is now 22. She has got all her teeth, but she does spend most of her weekends sailing on the river, on the Mersey, so who knows. Well, I share this story not simply because it happened on Mothering Sunday, but because through that rather dark sense of humour, I felt seen. The priest got it, and he took quite a risk. But his words reached out and they punctured through all the worries and the boundaries that were surrounding me in that moment. Suddenly here was empathy, in amongst the bigger picture of navigating church etiquette, feeling like a failure of a mum on Mothering Sunday. In a busy service, here was something that connected so specifically for me that I felt encouraged to go back the next week and the next week. And now, here I am, standing here. And in the vestry, which is the room behind me, I've got a clerical cloak hanging up. And it was a gift in the will of the late Reverend Canon Malcolm Emmel, who preached that day and became part of my bigger story. And today's readings are particularly about mothers, yes, but we see God not just working in the particular, but also in the bigger picture too. God crossing boundaries and attending to worries with care and attention to individual needs, trusting people, taking risks, working so that what seems to be particularly for each person in their moment can be seen with hindsight to carry monumental significance in a much bigger picture. We see it first in the story of Exodus, as boundaries of class and race and religion and age and status are brushed aside when an Egyptian princess and a young Hebrew slave girl lock eyes. And in that moment of understanding and recognition, they risk trusting one another to do the right thing in a desperate situation. They become unlikely allies against the cruelty they have witnessed against hundreds of Hebrew baby boys at the hands of powerful men. Princess and slave girl alike are able to offer something which will keep an innocent child alive protection from her royal status, food and comfort from Moses' mother. Words of explanation aren't needed in their encounter, and what is understood between them is better and safer left unsaid. But the account of Moses, rescued from the reed beds, is one of mutual courage, risk-taking, and trust between four very different women. Moses' mother, his sister Miriam, the princess, and her maid, they got it. And for their particular, in the moment, brave, empathetic, loving actions worked not only to save baby Moses and restore the joy and relief to Moses' birth family, but ultimately worked out to secure that God's grand plans to rescue the entire enslaved Hebrew people had begun. God, working through four particular women by a river, crossing boundaries and attending to the worries of that particular moment, but with an eye on the bigger picture. God noticing a mother's love, a sister's devotion, a princess's outrage, and a maid's obedience, and uniting them to save a baby. But without their knowing, God catches them up, honouring not just their particular situation, but weaving their story into the bigger picture of God's love and empathy and outrage and devotion towards an entire nation. In our gospel reading, again, we see God in the particular and in the bigger picture. Jesus is dying. He's enduring agonies that we daren't imagine. But in that moment, in the moment at the very centre of time where humanity nails its God to a cross, that God sees and focuses in on just two people, two particular people whom he loves, and risks spending his dying words on those two particular people, his mother and his friend, to ensure that they'll be looked after and comforted after he is gone. He hands them to one another, telling them that they are now one another's family. It is Jesus' deeply personal dying wish. It's a deeply human instinct. And it's also, I think, part of God's bigger picture too. Let me explain that further. With today being Mothering Sunday, we are naturally focusing on the experiences and the actions of a particular group of people, mothers. That's our particular today. But we are also here for a baptism, for Heidi. And that's part of a bigger picture. Because in baptism, you suddenly find yourself, just like Mary and John at the foot of the cross, part of a bigger family that you never expected to belong to. A family that are entrusted to honour and care for every human being in their vulnerability. A family in which we all have a role. A bigger family. And it's a bit of a risk going into a family. Families are complicated, we don't always agree, but God's bigger family are called to break down barriers that the world builds, to risk caring for one another, loving one another, to see one another, to be joined to one another as brothers and sisters in a family that now stretches across the globe and reaches back through time. It began at the foot of the cross. And today we've baptised little Heidi. And it's been a service that is all particularly about Heidi. God sees Heidi. He knows her, he loves her, and we do too. And I'm delighted I'm a godparent. But it's also absolutely about all of us, the big family of God. We've made collective promises. We remember that as Heidi's church family, we have all been handed out to one another. We all belong to one another. And we confirm together that we will welcome and encourage and love and pray for Heidi as part of that family. It makes sense to me, I think, that a God who could be and is everywhere or anywhere, a God who broke down barriers, risked his love, and being particularly seen and understood in just one man, Jesus. It makes sense that that God would choose to work through our particular and personal needs too, our actions, and would weave those moments where we take risks and where we show love and where we break down barriers into his plans that are so outrageous in their size and scope that all the world in all time is encompassed and included within them. None of us know the full extent of our bigger picture roles. None of us know how our actions, our decisions, our relationships, or our baptism vows will have an impact. But isn't it wonderful that however beautifully particular God's love is just for us, however seen we feel, we are always also connected in a bigger picture, where everyone, be they princesses or slaves, mothers, maids, Mary, John, Canon Malcolm Emil, Lizzie Reynolds, or Heidi Emily Walker, will play their part. Amen.